Everyone has heard about fairies, the diminutive and elegantly beautiful little creatures with insect or butterfly wings, which sprinkle fairy dust and hide in the deep woods, unseen by human eyes. For the most part, this is an accurate depiction, except for the fact that fairy folk come in many shapes and sizes and are not restricted to the slender female variety so often seen in books and cinema. Although such girl fairies do exist, they are more accurately called pixies and make up only a small contingent of the fairy folk nation. Every nation has some name for the fairy folk. They may go by different titles, but they are describing the same beings. Supernatural creatures of the forest who are small, highly mobile, and able to wield a magic all their own. The magic of the fairy folk is distilled from the very essence of the forest. Much like the leprechaun, the fairy folk obtain their magical abilities from the concentration of greenery. Only for the fairies, it is the overall essence of the woodlands, including the rivers, the stones, the toadstools, and all the animals in the woods, which bring them into being and fuel their magical energies. As a result of this, the fairy folk are highly protective of the forest and everything in it. They use their supernatural abilities to help ensure the forest remains intact. In ancient Irish folklore, the fairy folk are referred to as Aes Sedai. In Poland, they are referred to as the Viwa. The Cherokee called these elf-like beings of the forest the Nu-Ehi. Although present in the traditions of all cultures, a few of the world's people concentrated the majority of their religious beliefs around the fairy folk and the subtle, potent wizardry they have at their command. The Druidic tradition of the Irish, Scottish, and English nations relied heavily on the presence and interactions of the fairies in order to draw power into their sacred rites and bestow supernatural abilities on their priests. This fairy religion was the most prominent religion for the British Isles and much of the ancient Europe for millennia. Given all this, it goes without saying that no nature spirits have had a greater influence or have played a greater hand in the development of human history as the fairy folk. For this reason, these are the primary spirits which any nature spirit hunter will be trying to contact. Given the long shared history between our two races, there is an affinity and friendliness between fairies and humanity, which can be utilized and developed by the skilled and perceptive hiker. There are, however, always risks associated with any interaction with nature spirits. So it is necessary to know the different varieties of fairy folk and how to behave around them if you hope to make a success of your hunt for the elusive fairy folk. Apart from pixies, there are sylphs, undines, water babies, salamander, and many other varieties of fairy folk who specialize in a particular element of the woods. For example, pixies are specific to flowers and gardens. This is the reason why pixies were included in our other book, The New Homeowner's Guide to House Spirits, because the average home garden can often attract these beautiful and unpredictable creatures, provided they are full of flowers and are lovingly created and tended. Sylphs occupy the wide open spaces, riding the winds and sailing through the skies above the canopy of leaves. Undines and water babies live in the sylvan streams and tranquil lakes which hide unseen and unsullied by man, deep in the heart of the woods. Salamanders live in the fire and can be found in underground magma, forest fires, and brilliantly lit spaces. It is believed that even the insects, moss, and forest mushrooms have a particular race of fairy associated with them. But as these creatures haven't been named by many cultures, we will refrain from writing about them. Only those nature spirits that are widely known will be mentioned in this book. You are welcome, however, to seek out the lesser-known fairy folk which haunt the mushrooms, grasses, or forest insects. Keep in mind, when forest hiking, that all elements of the woods have a fairy associated with them. The spirits of the trees, known as dryads, are also classified as fairy folk. However, given that forests are solely defined by their trees, the tree spirits are a particularly powerful variety of fairy folk. Because of their power and complexity, they will be given their own section and will be examined separately in the chapter dedicated to forests and meadows. How to make contact. The fairy folk are not hostile towards human beings, but they are very shy and skittish. They are easily startled, and so it requires great gentleness and an exceedingly patient soul to draw them out of the shadows and make them comfortable enough in your presence to allow themselves to be seen. If you are walking through a wild and secluded area of the forest, and you get that magical twinge of warm and fuzzy fascination, which often comes when you are exposed to pristine natural scenes, then you will know that you are in the presence of fairies. It is their presence, in fact, which gives this pleasant physical reaction, although most people do not know it. If you have never felt it before, then it would be hard for anyone to describe that subtle tingling and pleasurable resonance that you get when you are in a fairy wood. However, given enough time spent hiking through the woods, you are sure to feel it. The psychically sensitive hiker will learn to identify this feeling with great precision and so be able to detect at once when they are in the presence of unseen fairy spirits. You will often notice, if you are an experienced trekker, that the presence of human beings, vehicles, or the cacophony of civilization will completely dispel that warm and fuzzy feeling you get from the presence of fairy folk. There is a very good reason for this. Fairies flee at the sight of humanity, not because they dislike them, but because their behavior can often be violent and unfathomable to them. Especially if the human beings involved are of the loud, boisterous, and destructive variety, then fairies will not hesitate to flee the scene. The machines of humanity in particular horrify and disgust the fairy folk. All you need to do to clear fairies out of a forest is to rev your motorcycle engine or start up a chainsaw, and they will head for the hills. All things that make you human are the bane of the fairy folk. Knowing this, the methods you should employ to get close to the fairies should be clear. Always tread the woods quietly, with a peaceful demeanor and a respectful humility. It is essential to be as respectful and gentle as possible if you hope to blend in with the forest and so put the fairy folk at their ease. Always remember, you cannot see the fairies unless you make yourself indistinguishable from the woods. In the quest for fairies, your humanity is your liability. You must cover it up as effectively as possible if you want to step over the threshold between the human world and into the world of fairy. It is important to remember that fairy folk are not physical beings. They are able to manifest physically, but they are not physical beings at their source. They are beings of energy. They are rife with the energies of the forest, and so your energies must sync as closely as possible to the forest's energies if you want to step into their world and so make them comfortable enough to manifest before you. When you trek through the forest in search of fairies, leave the vehicle at home. It is essential to go on foot. Even a quiet contraption such as a bicycle is still a contraption. All perverse human contrivances such as this are repellent to the fairy folk. Take as little machinery or electronic equipment with you as possible. Wear natural fabrics and natural scents, and try to wear colors that will allow you to blend in with the natural greenery. You may feel silly dressing in green, wearing all cotton, and smelling of lilac perfume on your hikes, but the effects will be greater than you can imagine. A natural stone or two hung around your neck or a flower or two in your front pocket will also do wonders insofar as helping you to blend in. Remember that fairies are beings of energy. It is important to keep your mind clear and serene in order to assure you are giving off a friendly, inviting energy. Angry, aggressive thoughts will clash with fairy energies and repel them from you. Positive, gentle, reciprocal thoughts, on the other hand, will draw them towards you. If you want the best possible result, then allow yourself to breathe in the essence of the forest and let that positive, gentle energy enter your soul. The more your inner emotions resemble the subtle feelings of the forest, the more likely you are to shift into fairyland and begin your journey into this strange and mystical domain. If you are successful in blending in with the surroundings, then you will begin to feel that distinct tingling caused by the presence of faerie to increasingly more potent degrees. This in of itself is an exhilarating experience which will leave you feeling happier, healthier, and more alive than ever before. This is because it is caused by the presence of many fairies which are drawing ever closer to you, possibly even touching you in their curiosity. Eventually on your travels, you will have so many of these intense tingling experiences that you will begin to feel exultant and elated, as if something incredibly wonderful is about to happen. This exultant state means that fairies are just about to show themselves to you. It means you are just a hair's breadth away from first contact with the fairy folk. When they finally do show themselves, it could take any form. You may see a sylph darting between the trees, you may hear a water baby giggling in the brook, or you might see a ring of pixies dancing in the flower bed. The fairy folk are so varied and so many that there is no limit to the strange and new sights you will witness. When once the veil has been lifted from your eyes, which hides the fairy world from the eyes of humankind. How to befriend. When you do at last earn the privilege to observe these strange and sacred sights, you must treat them as sacred if you wish to continue seeing them. Do not show any disrespect. Treat both the fairies and their actions with reverence. Do not interrupt the fairies and do not address them directly. Fairies may appear to you or touch you or interact with you gently, but they are not verbal creatures and will not speak to you. They will only communicate through feelings or energies, which they may on occasion direct to you. Only psychically gifted hunters will be able to hear them, and the rewards of receiving a fairy message will be like plunging into an endless and vast reservoir of healing positive emotions. The only exception to this general silence for the fairy folk is the fairy queen. This mythical figure is said to be the leader of the entirety of the fairy dominion, and she is as intelligent and articulate as any human being, if not much, much more so. We would like to give more information on the mysterious fairy queen, but so little has been documented about her that we have no information to go on. It is said, however, that to befriend the fairy queen opens up the option of coming to live in the land of fairy for good. The few who have been reported to have met the fairy queen and befriended her have always vanished soon afterwards. Given that fairies are known to be fundamentally good, it is likely there is no sinister explanation for these experiences. Rather, in all likelihood, these blessed souls were probably given the privilege of leaving this dark and dreary world of humanity behind and stepping beyond the veil, to live forever in wonder in the strange, sparkling, and magical world of fairy. Apart from the fairy queen, however, the regular fairy folk have no particular magical boons they can bestow upon you, the way a leprechaun or a dryad might. The benefit to be gained from observing the fairies is entirely intrinsic. The feeling of being in their presence and interacting with them intimately is like going back to your source as a living thing and touching the core of your being. It is invigorating, rejuvenating, healing beyond all expression to even feel the presence of the fairies, let alone see them and communicate with them. Health, perpetual joy, youth, good fortune, and an unending wellspring of energy are the rewards of anyone who is lucky or skilled enough to earn themselves a trusted place in a community of fairy folk. These things will naturally infuse into your being every moment you are in the presence of fairies. The more closely you have gotten to them, and the more you have earned their close personal contact, the more pronounced will these blessings be. What is more, when you have earned the trust of fairies, it will alter your own personal energy signature. From there on in, you will be more appealing and less repellent to all manner of nature spirits, because of your own personal aura of energy will be positively influenced by the fairy folk. You will begin to appear less human and more fairy in all natural spirits. Leprechauns, dryads, and even unpleasant beings such as the drow and the dragon will be more positively disposed to you than they otherwise would be. And so befriending the fairies is a very valuable defensive measure for any hiker to utilize. Having the improved aura of a fairy friend can not only help you to befriend other nature spirits, but can also make spirits less inclined to attack you, and so make your nature spirit hunt a much less hazardous endeavor in general. Some especially talented hikers have managed to make friends with the fairies of an entire wood by proceeding one by one, tree by tree, and flower by flower, and coming to know the individual fairies of every little nook and cranny. Fairies often befriend and make social bonds with one another, so if you befriend one fairy, you can more easily befriend fairies in its social circle as well. By following each individual link in that chain of fairy social circles, you can eventually befriend every fairy in the woods, and so become a truly exalted friend among the fairy folk. Any hiker able to accomplish such a phenomenal feat will naturally gain great natural blessings and will appear as a scintillating wellspring of vitality to both men and fairies. How to offend? As has been stated, machinery of any kind is abhorrent to the fairies. They do not like houses, highways, or anything else that was created by humans. Pollution and loud noises of all kind, unless coming from a natural source, are also very repellent to them. If you stomp through the forest blasting heavy metal music on your boombox, smoking a big cigar and singing along at the top of your lungs, you will likely scare away any fairy in the vicinity, as well as all the animals, and possibly a few humans. However, this will not actually offend the creatures per se. They are frightened and disgusted by any and all human activities, but they are not prone to anger. Being spirits of positive energy, they are unlikely to direct negative energies to anybody, even a crude and destructive human being who probably deserves to be punished. Even if you commit the worst kind of sins and go about destroying the trees and flowers, the fairies will merely flee in terror, rather than seek their vengeance. Even if the fairies do not retaliate, however, it is still a risky business destroying natural spaces, because there are more powerful spirits than fairy folk residing in the wild and secluded places of the world. The fairies, however, are generally gentle creatures and are not particularly powerful. They are as fragile and beautiful as the flowers themselves and do not present much of a danger to anybody. But they do have one fundamental power which should make any hiker loath to offend them. Whether pixies, sylphs, or any other variety of fairy folk, the rules of approaching and befriending them are the same. In addition, the laws of magic that thrives in the world of fairy is the same for all fairy beings. And so, all fairies have the same abilities and magical qualities. The worst form of magic in the fairy repertoire is the fairy hex. This dire curse will be thrown at you any time you disturb the peace of the forest or cause a fairy to flee in terror through your rough and boorish behavior. This hex is like a tattoo on your forehead which tells all fairy folk that you are an enemy of the fairies. It is actually not a tattoo, but a little fist of negative energy stuck to your forehead. This little package of bad karma will brand you as a danger and will be visible to all fairies. Even one hex mark on your forehead will be enough to make the more sensitive fairies hesitate to come near you. But if you annoyed multitudes of fairies, you will have so many of these hex marks on your forehead that you will be avoided like the plague, not only by fairies, but by any and all nature spirits. Given the purpose of this book is to help you become a successful watcher of nature spirits, we highly recommend that you avoid offending and annoying the fairies at all costs. Few things could be more detrimental to your success as a nature spirit hunter than a slew of fairy hex marks on your forehead, causing all nature spirits to give you a wide berth. If you have a history of revving your motorcycle engine in the forest or are a reformed lumberjack, don't give up on nature spirit hunting just yet. The fairy hex marks are impermanent, much like the fluxing energies of nature themselves, and over the years they will fade, allowing you to redeem yourself and possibly even re-establish yourself as a trusted friend of the fairy folk.